Welcome to Sound Test. My name is Bryan, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the newest Batman movie, The Batman, starring Robert Pattinson, directed by Matt Reeves. This video / podcast will be very spoilery in nature. I'm going to talk about a lot of elements of the plot, a lot of elements about Robert Pattinson as Batman, the supporting cast, many different things, elements about the movie. So if you have not seen the movie, just know that there's going to be a lot of spoilers, and a lot of the discussion is going to be about the content of the actual movie and the narrative and plot. So the first aspect I want to talk about is Batman, the character. And, I think everybody had their reservations with the casting when they first heard that Robert Pattinson was going to star as Batman. And it was just one of those situations where he was very typecast with what he did in the Twilight series. And so a lot of people just had that permanent image of him in the Twilight series. And so a lot of people, including myself, couldn't picture him in the role, especially as something as Batman, who's supposed to be this, duality of a very fearsome being under the Batman persona, as well as being this, the playboy philanthropist, Bruce Wayne, this outgoing, charismatic person. And that's always the issue when it comes to casting Batman, is that having that dual personality is something that is very hard to capture, both in the essence of the character and bringing justice to it on the big screen. And I think the moment that sold a lot of people on the idea of Robert Pattinson being Batman was that initial trailer when, he was saying that I am vengeance. That initial trailer set the tone of the movie to a lot of people. And I think that's what a lot of people, including myself, was like, okay, maybe Robert Pattinson can do a good job in this role. And then speaking of vengeance, that's kind of a central idea that we hear a lot. Vengeance or the fear or anger. That's a lot of key elements of this movie and of Batman as a character. So, Batman is one of my favorite comic book characters, only because he's very rooted in reality. And when I mean rooted in reality, Batman himself is not a superhero. He doesn't have superpowers. Yes, he has gadgets and he has, money to fund those gadgets, but a lot of aspects of Batman's character is based on his honor, based on his physical abilities, and the fact that at the end of the day, he's still just a normal human being. And him being compared to Green Lantern, The Flash, and Superman, with these people with superpowers, is the fact that Batman, regardless of him not having superpowers, is still very well respected within the Justice League and, the overall DC fandom. And I feel like a lot of aspects of Batman's character and the stories they tell is based off these psychological things that happen to normal people. And that's one of the reasons why, I love Batman as a character and his storylines, because it's focusing on what happens when you push normal people to the brink. What happens when you put people in terrible situations that they really can't get out of. And so, and that's always a central part of Batman as himself, being somebody who was orphaned at a young age, with something that he couldn't control. And so with Robert Pattinson being Batman, this is a young Batman. So this is literally year 2 of Batman. And as I said, vengeance is a key element in this story. And that's essentially what this Batman boils down to. Because this is a young Batman, this is year 2 of Batman, his focus is on vengeance. His focus is on, striking fear. And the very first opening monologue is such a powerful, aspect to his character, because you see Gotham and you see how crime-ridden Gotham is, how terrible of a place Gotham is, and you see what the criminals are doing. But once they see that bat symbol, they completely change their demeanor. They completely change, it's like a beacon, and they all stopped in their tracks once they saw that beacon. And a lot of parts of that is him being that vengeance, being that fear within this setting of Gotham, to the point where there's nothing down a dark alley, but the criminals are fearing that dark alley as if Batman is even there, even if there's nothing over there. And so, with that being said, Robert Pattinson plays a very angry Batman. This is a Batman who's not afraid to really hurt somebody. This is a Batman who, because of so much anger that's within him, he is like very brutal when it comes to the criminals and really, one of the other key elements of this character is that Batman is that duality of man, the vengeance, the scary side with Batman, and then, the outgoing, personable side with Bruce Wayne. And in this movie, the typical idea of Bruce Wayne is not shown. And I say that because Robert Pattinson does a great job of being this intimidating figure as Batman, but that bleeds into Bruce Wayne as a character. This Bruce Wayne isn't, sociable. This Bruce Wayne isn't a likable character. This Bruce Wayne is a recluse. He's shrugging his responsibilities as Bruce Wayne. He's not doing philanthropy. He's not giving money out. He's not in the public light. He's not this, charismatic person. The times you see Robert Pattinson as Batman, he is a very, for lack of better terms, an emo character. He doesn't say much. He always looks like he has problems going on. His hair is always all crazy. And maybe 10% of the movies he's actually playing as Bruce Wayne. And those times you see him, Bruce Wayne is not a likable person, and part of that is because he's young. He still had this anger from his parents' death, and from how horrid, Gotham City is. And so when it comes to that line of this is Batman, this is Bruce Wayne, that line is not here. And that's one of the kind of unique aspects of Pattinson's role as Batman, is that because he's this young Batman, he doesn't have that split personality yet. He's just angry all the time. And when it comes to, his journey by the end of the movie, it comes to him that vengeance is not always the answer, or is not specifically, he shouldn't be looked at as vengeance. And he realizes that when he's taking down a criminal, and when, the GCPD takes that person down and they ask, "Who are you?" And he says, "I am vengeance." And that's like the key moment to, Bruce Wayne to realize, I'm doing this the wrong way. I'm not coming about this the way that I intended. And then he kind of changes his idea of being from vengeance instead of being hope. And I think that's important, because a lot of times we kind of see in media Batman with his stuff together. We see, a middle-aged Bruce Wayne, or a Batman who's several years into him being Batman. So he's gotten down this dual personality. This is a Batman that makes mistakes. Now, don't get me wrong. He's very capable in a lot of elements in this movie, but this is still a Bruce Wayne that makes mistakes. This is a Batman that makes mistakes. And there's times in the movie where you see like he's kind of second guessing himself in certain situations, or he doesn't quite play things in the way we would typically, expect Batman to play. And that's because he's still kind of learning how to be Batman. He's still trying to learn how to be this figure in Gotham. Like one of the key elements, towards the beginning of the film, he needs to talk to the Penguin. And Instead of, we is always like a joke about Batman. He just shows up places and he disappears places without you noticing him. In this situation, when he needs to confront Penguin, he goes up directly to the club, announces who he is, and then when all the thugs and criminals try to get him, he makes this big spectacle and has this big fight and things like that. And part of that is because he's still under this idea of vengeance. He wants to be feared. He wants people to understand his presence in Gotham. He wants people to know that he's about that. He's not going to take any criminal for granted. And then, when Penguin sees this is like a big, okay, whoa, hold up. All right, let's talk. And that was his way of establishing that. And typically when we see Batman, we think of him as kind of like this mysterious figure that he just shows up. And if we think of a more, mature Batman, instead of bursting into the club, he's going to find Penguin directly, drop in on him, and Penguin wouldn't even expect it. But in this case, because he's so young, he still has this anger and he still has this, naivety of him. He's just going to like burst through and just make his presence known. And over the course of the film, there's some subtle things that changes with him where you see he doesn't take this direct approach as much. Now he's starting to learn to be a little bit more covert. He's learning how to, be a better detective as well. And that's another cool element of this Batman is that there's more, it feels like there's way more detective approach to Batman in this narrative than it is in the previous other films. Ben Affleck as Batman. I personally never had a problem with him. A lot of people didn't like him, but I did like Ben Affleck's role as Batman because it was a older Batman who's been jaded, who's, outside of his prime years. And, to see that Batman, he's kind of just like trying to keep himself together, trying to hold things together. And at the same time, trying to make this super team. But with this Batman, because he's, so young, he's making mistakes and things like that, his interpretation of Gotham is completely different. And with him seeing how crime-ridden Gotham is, he's taking that time to really analyze things. He's taking time to really problem-solve elements. He's taking time to show how valuable he is to crime solving. And that's not an aspect we get a lot. I feel like the Nolan films were very, action-based. While, as I said, Ben Affleck's role was more so on the role of him being this older figure, this trying to be this leader and trying to corral people together. But this Batman is really hyper focused on the actual detective aspects, to the fact that he's solving he's solving the riddles. He's solving this faster than GCPD. The fact that he has like these contact lenses that, video record and audio record. He's using these different elements to be a better detective and solve things like that. But when it comes to when he needs to be angry, he's angry. And that's the kind of the immature side of him. So, it's very layered in terms of what Pattinson really brings to the Batman character and what Matt Reeves' understanding of what Gotham is and Batman's role in Gotham. So for the supporting cast, we have Commissioner Gordon, and I'll say as an extension, the GCPD. As I said, because this is such a young Batman is not respected by the police. And there's several reasons about that. Obviously, the main reason is that he's a vigilante. He's not going, with the law. He's not doing things by protocol. His methods are very, harsh and brutal and rough. And Commissioner Gordon is kind of like the only person that really connects with Batman, the only person that gives Batman a chance, to the point where there's a scene where, Batman is kind of like transported by the GCPD because he was knocked out. And the GCPD was just ready to unmask him And Commissioner Gordon was the only one that was preventing them from doing that. Now we think about an older Batman, the GCPD would never like try to cross that line. But because this is a younger Batman and a younger Gordon, he's not even actually commissioner yet. He's still like a detective, or, you know, he has some type of rank in the GCPD, but he's not the commissioner. And, you know, the fact that he protects Batman, a lot of people from the GCPD do not like that. But another element of the GCPD is that this is a GCPD that's rotten to the core. You know, a lot of the people in the GCPD, like the DA and the, you know, the first commissioner, they're all very heavily influenced by the underground societies of Gotham. And I shouldn't say underground, more of the criminal societies of Gotham. The underlying things that's going on in Gotham, the GCPD are very much involved in that. And it almost seems like Gordon is the only good cop within the GCPD. And because of that, that's probably why he has such a strong relationship with Batman in that case. And you see, you know, Gordon kind of corral everybody around to understanding Batman and his methods, to the point where, like, even the bat symbol, which, you know, usually in most media is predicted, you know, it's shown that it's part of the GCPD. In this case, it's like an abandoned building that only Gordon knows about. And if Gordon needs to contact Batman, only him, you know, he is the only one that's actually going to this area. None of the other GCPD is doing that. And that just shows the strain of Gordon compared to the other GCPD when it comes to Batman. Then we have Catwoman, which I think she did a phenomenal job portraying Catwoman. Again, this is a young Catwoman. So she's a little bit more hot-headed. She's a little bit more, in certain ways, similar to Batman, where her emotions take over her when she gets angry or when things are not going her way. She goes to the absolute extremes. And we see that in parts where she was like clearly about to kill people, and, you know, Batman has to stop her, has to prevent her from crossing that line, because, you know, that's going to make her essentially a criminal just like the rest of them. And so she plays the role of anti-hero very, very well in this, in which, yeah, she's working with Batman, but in a lot of cases, she's doing her own thing. And she's doing it in a way that, you know, even Batman as a vigilante does not approve of her doing that. And, you know, at first their partnership was rocky, in which he had her, you know, basically going undercover for him. And once it gets to the point where she doesn't want to do it anymore, she just cuts ties. And she's like, I'm done with this. And, you know, that shows of how different their approaches are in the narrative, and how different their approaches are in Gotham. You know, and to the point where at the end of the movie, Catwoman's actually leaving Gotham, and she asks, you know, Bruce to go with her, Batman to go with her. And he's like, no, I have to stay here. And, you know, her whole understanding is why Gotham is unsavable. There's no point of trying to, you know, put hope back into this community. It's all hope is lost with this. And, you know, at the end, Batman is still under the idea of hope, that he can make a difference and that Gotham can change. The other supporting cast in terms of the villains, we have the Penguin in here. Colin Farrell plays the Penguin, and he's like completely, you know, he loses himself into that role to the point where you don't, you know, actually see him. And when we look at a lot of the rogues gallery in this, with the Penguin, with Falcone, and the Riddler, I like their interpretations because they're very grounded. You know, the Penguin isn't comically, you know, over the top like he usually is. You know, he's still a crime boss, but he's a crime boss that's like, you know, grounded in reality. He's not just like overly, you know, laughing. He's not overly comedic. He's not. He plays like a person who's just aggravated at Batman's presence. But at the same time, he's still a businessman, so he knows to work things in a certain way, say things in a certain way that doesn't get him in trouble. And, you know, he comes at different levels of respect towards Batman. Obviously, he doesn't like Batman, but he's not to the point where he can just, you know, have everybody try to shoot him out on first sight. That's not the point. And he's not just like sitting in the shadows laughing maniacally while, you know, his minions are doing his bidding. It's not overly, you know, comical like that, or over the top like that. And then Falcone too, you know, Falcone is this very well seasoned criminal to the point where he's very respected both inside and outside of the criminal world. And to the point where he's not a cartoonist villain. He's clearly this person who's done his time. He knows the underbelly of Gotham. He knows who to talk to. He knows who to influence, and he knows who exactly to push and pull when it comes to control in Gotham. And then we had the Riddler, and this is, you know, this Batman is taking place in modern times. So one of the cool aspects I liked about the Riddler is that he plays up the social media aspect a lot, and Riddler plays more of a Saw character. So, you know, Riddler is always a character that's goofy at his premise. You know, he's a person who commits crime and leaves riddles. You know, that's a character that's by nature is always going to be goofy. But I like how they added this kind of horror element to the Riddler and his riddles. You know, you see people horrendously damaged. You see people that go through these nightmare scenarios where there's bombs attached to them, or they're getting eaten alive by rats. And he places all these, you know, nightmare scenarios, understanding his limitations as a human being. And that's what I mean by grounded in reality. He's not freakishly powerful or anything like that. He's just cunning in the way he traps people essentially into these traps. He understands the, you know, vices of man. He understands when people are going to be their most vulnerable. And when they're their most vulnerable, he takes that opportunity and gets them at those points. And I like the social media aspect of it, where this is somebody he's hiding in plain sight. And that's because he's live streaming. He has his underground following. He built up this, you know, contention of people without him directly leading them. So he's not a crime boss in the idea that he has underlings, but his influence is influencing people that he knows hurts like him. He knows that he can reach, and he knows that he can sympathize with. And those people end up being the, you know, big fight at the end. And, you know, his character himself, under the mask, he changes his voice. He's like completely covered head to toe. You know, this is not the brightly colored, you know, green colored Riddler with, again, over top antics. No, this is a serial killer. This is a calculated serial killer. And, you know, one of the, you know, interesting aspects of that, he plays this serial killer vibe. He you know, has his following. He's constantly terrorizing people of Gotham through this anonymity. And then when he gets captured, he just lets it happen. And he's just a normal person. And matter of fact, he's a non-threatening person at that. He's just sitting at a diner alone, stirring some coffee. And him having that just such a, you know, a basic appearance and this, you know, very unassuming nature of him shows how Gotham itself can influence a person, how Gotham is such this seedy environment that it influences even the most mundane looking people and making them killers and making them criminals. And that's kind of like his whole, you know, aspect of the Riddler. And I like that they played up the horror elements a lot, where it's not outright, you know, like jump scares or anything like that, but it's just the fact that you don't know who he's going to target next. He's known, his presence is known, but nobody knows how he looks like. Nobody knows his specific targets, and the riddles that he does leave around the city, they're not super, super clever, to the point where, they kind of solve a lot of them quickly. It's only the very last riddle that they don't understand, that kind of takes them for a surprise. But, he's always a step ahead of Batman and Gordon. But the riddles are not they're not to the point where you're like, oh, okay, cool. They're kind of like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But yeah, I did like their portrayal of Riddler. They put a lot of seriousness to his character. And, the other unspoken character itself is Gotham City. And with Gotham, in this environment, it reminds me of elements of the Joker, in which, Gotham is this place where the normal person doesn't feel like they matter. This is an environment where it is almost scary at every twist and turn, whether it be from the Batman or just the regular, the gangs there, or just the regular people there. There's not a lot of times we see Gotham in the light. A lot of times we see Gotham at night. And even the times that we, see Gotham at light, like the funeral for the commissioner, it is like a dark and dreary scene. This is not a scene where everybody looks happy, or obviously it's a funeral. It's not going to be happy, but it's not an environment where people are really even sad or mourning. It's a contention even at this funeral, because you have a bunch of protesters that's protesting, the corruptness of the commissioner and the corruptness of the mayor, the mayor's funeral, where they're, going against the corruptness of the mayor, and how they're really identifying with the Riddler and what he's doing, and his whole idea of bringing all this seediness of Gotham into light. So the last aspect I want to really kind of talk about is the plot. And with the plot, I think Matt Reeves did a really great job of, grounding it in reality to the point where you can see these people have been pushed to a certain point. So, one of the kind of aspects we see a lot in Batman is that, Bruce Wayne, his family was this honorable family, and, they spent years of philanthropy and being visions of hope within Gotham. And, I always kind of felt that there's a weird, is a weird relation to Gotham itself. If Gotham is such this terrible place with crime-ridden, elements, why does it make sense that the super rich are in this environment? It wouldn't make sense that you have this elite that, crowds into Gotham to the point where you need a vigilante to solve a lot of the issues in Gotham. And so the story in here takes up on that idea. And so, we don't really labor on the death of Bruce's parents, but rather the history behind Bruce's parents. And so, we see that Martha and Thomas Wayne wasn't super, they weren't these squeaky clean images of Gotham, just as any other criminal in Gotham, or in some cases, the crime lords and the normal people, they have a shady past as well. They have something to hide. And, one of the aspects of the Riddler, one of his targets was Bruce Wayne, not knowing he was Batman. And one of his targets was Bruce Wayne was because Bruce was orphaned just like him, but Bruce had a support system in terms of his family's wealth and because of Alfred. The Riddler, when he became an orphan, didn't have this support system. And he had to go through this really crappy life, being an orphan, being through the foster care system, being in this orphanage, and just really feeling the weight of the world on him and nobody being there to help him. And Bruce Wayne didn't have those issues. So he had this resentment of Bruce Wayne because of this. But not only that, Bruce's parents was directly influenced to him being an orphan, with his father being killed essentially by Thomas Wayne. Now, obviously, Thomas Wayne wasn't one who killed him, but Thomas Wayne's connections with the criminal underground and Falcone led to the, Riddler becoming an orphan. And, a lot of this, elements of the movie focuses on the seedy underground and things that's been festering for years. And this was the boiling point. The Riddler was the boiling point of decades of, money laundering, decades of mismanagement, decades of, seedy practices that's been going on through Gotham. And Bruce's parents was a part of this, where Martha, there was times where she was having issues where she was considered psychotic and crazy, and that because that image didn't need to be shown to the public as Thomas Wayne was running for mayor, he had to find some way to, again, try to make the Waynes seem like this squeaky clean family, seem like the Arkhams were this squeaky clean family. And so when we see those actions he did, decades and decades ago when Bruce was just a child, come into the light many, many years later, Bruce is very conflicted with this because, again, he had this image in his mind of his parents were good people. So when it comes to Gotham, that's another thing I like about the plot is that this is not a terrible city just because it's a terrible city. There's things in the plot built in from decades and decades of some type of shadiness going on that results to what Gotham is today. Like the one big plot point is the renewal plan and how this money was supposed to be something positive for Gotham. And it ended up being something that was constantly money laundered through the criminal organizations, and how, almost every mayor is talking about change for the city, but that change never happens. And when it comes to the climax of the film, I love how they don't win. This is not a happy ending. It is a hopeful ending, but it's not a happy ending, because they essentially lose. That conversation that Batman has with the Riddler, once he realizes this is not over, and this ramps up to this heights where, the bombs Riddler planted start exploding, and we see the flooding that goes on and destruction that happens in Gotham. Gotham is left at a terrible place. Like, physically is left at a terrible place, but mentally there's some type of hope from there. And that's because of the actions of Batman. That's because of he kind of becomes this small beacon of hope in a desolate environment. And we see that in the end when he, cuts off that rogue electrical sign that was going to, essentially shock and kill the mayor and all the people below. When he sacrifices himself there and takes out that striking red flare, and that shows like some type of beacon for everybody else. That red flare is something that shows that, hey, I need you to trust me. I need you to understand that I'm here for you. That little level of hope is what the movie ends off of. So instead of, Batman feeling like he needs to be vengeance, he needs to be hope now, because that's what the people of Gotham needs, is hope. And I think the story does a great job of understanding how people were pushed to their limits in Gotham, and that the Riddler is just a culmination of the feelings of many in Gotham, and how this city has been festering for so long. And that's kind of why Batman works in his environment. This is not a happy movie. This is a very dark, downtrodden movie. And, Matt Reeves' vision is something that makes me very excited for this, because they don't win at the beginning, at the end of the movie. Gotham physically changes a lot through this. The people change, the villains change, the environments change. the aspect of Batman as a hero changes through this narrative. And Matt Reeves leaves this environment in a way that you can see kind of how Penguin is going to react to Falcone essentially being out of the picture, or how how rampant the people were for the Riddler and his views of Gotham, of him putting these public figures and showing their shady past and putting them to the light. And all this culminates into this very, as I said, grounded in reality when you push people to their limit and how they respond to it. I'm not a big, film person, so I'm not going to talk, a lot about the, art of filmmaking that this movie has, but I do respect Matt Reeves and his vision for this. The camera angles that we see are usually very striking. Like one of the most striking, visual elements is the scene with Batman chasing the Penguin, and when Penguin car crashes, and you just see Batman menacingly coming through a lot of these flames, and he's just slowly approaching, and that's like that fear element in there, that vengeance element in there. It's very beautifully shot in scenes like that, and where you can see how big Gotham is, but how tiny it is. You see it as a big, this big city metropolis, but you still see how small it is when it comes to the connections of people, and you see how small it is when you take somebody like the Riddler and how his influence can affect the general populace and how they feel just the basings off of one person. So I'm very excited for a follow-up to this movie and to this universe. It takes Batman and Gotham in a different way we haven't seen much in a lot of the other movies, and it's a lot closer to what we would see portrayed in the comics or like in the Arkham games. So very high on this movie. I enjoyed it a lot. It is a long movie. It is almost 3 hours long. I believe it's 2 hours and 56 minutes. But as a Batman fan, it kind of just flew by really quickly. This was not a movie I was like, oh man, it's pretty long. I enjoyed it a lot. My only real criticisms will probably be the Joker reveal towards the end. And I kind of hope we don't go that direction for the next movie with Joker being the main villain. Only because I feel like the Joker's been done so many different times in so many different ways. It's a character that I would, he has so many different interpretations and so many, unique ways to go about that character. But this movie did not leave a good impression of him. We just got that dialogue, and that was really the low point of the movie was that. But I would like to see in this universe some of the lesser known Batman villains really get some exposure and really get into the limelight and put in this universe that Matt Reeves has created for the Batman. So hope you all enjoyed my analysis, my thoughts about the Batman. Don't really do movies much, but as a comic book fan and as a Batman fan, I really did want to give my thoughts and opinions on this movie. So thank you and hope you enjoyed. My name is Bryan. This has been Sound Test, and I will catch y'all on the next one.